Namaskar, and it's good to connect with you once again as we look at some key stories reflecting the state of the economy from an Indian point of view of the world with a weekly focus. On the show, OECD raises India's GDP growth forecast and projects 6.7% in 2025. China unveils K-visa to woo global STEM talent as US H-1B visa rules tightened with $100K fee hike. Indonesia and the EU finalize a landmark trade deal in Bali. They hope to accelerate investment in EVs, pharmaceuticals and tech. And Trump's tariff-driven foreign policy makes for tense UNGA talks on trade, climate and global reform. Well, before we move on to our top story, which is about the OECD's outlook for India, let's listen to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's chief economist, Alvaro Pereira, forecasting, in fact, a subdued global growth rate, of just 2.9% for the coming year, while also painting a slightly brighter picture for the emerging markets, which include Indonesia, Brazil, and India.
So we expect that growth will be subdued next year, around 2.9%. Usually when the world economy is doing really well, it's growing around 4%, so we're far away from that. And we expect also a little bit more inflation, especially in the United States. In the past few months, we had data that was revised up for certainly some emerging market economies, like in Indonesia, Brazil, and India, mostly for idiosyncratic shocks, but temporary ones. And so that's why we became a bit more positive about this year, even though we see that the next few months we expect that industrial growth and consumer confidence likely will come down. So
Well, you mentioned about consumer confidence, but it's sky high right now. So let's talk about the GDP growth forecast of the OECD for India. They're projecting 6.7% in 2025. They look at the world through calendar years, so they're looking at 2025 as this calendar year. And earlier they had estimated it at 6.3%, but they're projecting 6.2% growth in 2026. So that, I mean, they're presuming that things are going to go down a little bit, but we'll talk about that. What does this reflect for the moment? It's reflecting strong domestic demand. We can see that demand, in fact, has increased. There's a festive season on. We know that there are festive discounts, and that's going on. And then the monetary and fiscal policy has been easing to some extent. And then GST reforms. Also, supply side is adequately stocked, and there don't seem to be any shortages. Reforms on the goods and services tax, as we know, has created a number of discounts, and the market generally is buoyant right now. We move on to our next slide. So consumer inflation, they see, is at about 2.9% in FY26. This implies, obviously, that the supply side is strong. So the supply continues to, meet the demand in that sense. There's no shortages, and there's strong domestic supply, export controls also. So they believe that, because of the situation and the tariffs, a lot of those commodities are also available into the domestic market. Now, moving on to our next slide. So we see that there is robust demand. We talked about that earlier, what it reflected. There is the income tax cuts that came in the budget earlier, and then there are GST reforms which have added to put more money in the hands of the consumers. The household spending remains resilient as a result of all this, and we continue to see that. In fact, it's just started the festive season. It's going to continue for a few months, and we're likely to see demand remaining robust. Domestic demand is also going to cushion the global impact because the tariffs have impacted the rest, the US tariffs that is, and the new regime in a sense which is churning up the entire supply chains across the world. That is, India is relatively insulated from that because of the domestic demand, and the export-oriented manufacturing could be under pressure, but as I said earlier, a lot of those commodities are still available for domestic demand. We'll move on to our next slide. We are seeing stable growth. They are seeing stable growth expected. Food price inflation is going to be easing. Consumer confidence is strong. This is in the sector of agriculture, which is the primary sector. So we are seeing that we had a good monsoon as well, so there's stable growth expected in agriculture. We'll move on to the next sector, which is manufacturing, or in fact services. We did talk about manufacturing earlier. This continues to be a major growth engine. We know that, in fact, services are already contributing over 55%, to the GDP. So in that context, we're looking at services with IT, finance, and retail, digital expansion, urban consumption. All this, we know that it grew, in fact, at 9.3% in Q1 of FY26 already, and it has been growing at over 8% over the last few years. It also employs about 30% currently of the total employment in the country. So the services sector doing really well. But before we introduce you to our guests on the program, let's listen to the German ambassador to India. He's inviting skilled Indian workers to work in Germany. He said that Germany's migration policies are stable. They don't change fundamentally overnight. Let's listen to what he said.
This is a good moment to talk about Indians working in Germany. Indians are amongst the top earners in Germany. The average Indian working in Germany earns more than the average German working in Germany. And that's pretty good news. Because a high salary means that Indians are contributing big time to our society and our welfare. We believe in hard work, and we believe in giving the best jobs to the best people. Our migration policy works a bit like a German car. It's reliable, it is modern, it is predictable. It will go in a straight line with no zigzags. And you don't have to fear a full brake at a top speed. We do not change our rules fundamentally overnight. Highly skilled Indians are welcome in Germany.
In fact, we are scheduled to be joined by Dr. Rajat Kathuria, who will be joining us on Zoom link. But we have with us in the studio Prasenjit Basu, who's a well-known economist. In fact, we have with us Dr. Rajat Kathuria, who's the Dean of the School of Social Sciences and Humanities from Shiv Nadar University. He has joined us on Zoom. Prasenjit Basu is joining us in the studio as well. We'll start with you, Dr. Kathuria. Does the OECD have confidence in India's policy reforms? Do you see the momentum continuing in the medium term?
Well, I think, yes, I do. And I think India has been, as far as the GDP growth is concerned, India has been resilient. It's been growing above 6%, and 6.57% that the OECD is predicted for 2025, and 6.2 that you mentioned in your presentation, Mark. I think those numbers are, consistent with what we expect because of, I think, the impetus that would be provided by the GST changes in the tax regime. And I think a lot of people were talking about changes to the GST regime, that it had become sort of cumbersome. It had become, there were too many rates and it needed to be simplified. And I think the opportunity for political economy reform to happen, the opportunity was ripe that, Trump's tariffs that made more sort of uncertainty, introduced more uncertainty into the economy, was a good moment for India to think about what is it that we can do to shore up domestic demand in case demand is negatively impacted by exports. So pretty much the demand, the negative shock of expected decline in exports would be offset, it's thought to be offset by the tax reform. And I think there will be a big sort of boost, marginal impact immediately. And if the rates continue to be stable and decline over time, as the expectation is that there'll be more simplification in the GST regime going forward, I think the expectation is that there will be resilience in the growth story of India. I think that story is intact, 6% and above. And maybe, on the back of further economic reforms in the future, the growth could even be higher. But we are expecting 8% plus in the future to meet our domestic challenges. But for the moment, the forecasts of OECD are not sort of unrealistic, and we could expect these to happen. Yes.
Mr. Basu, what would you think? It has projected, the OECD projected easing of consumer and food prices. We've seen the prices fall because of GST revisions. Now, what do you think? I mean, the RBI Monetary Policy Committee will be looking at right now.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that inflation is going to be lower, and also I think growth is going to be quite a bit higher than the 6.7% number. For the simple reason that we've got a lot of stimulus this year. In the latest quarter, growth was 7.8%, and since then, there's been, in the year to date, between February and June, 100 basis points of rate cuts from the RBI. The CRR is going to be cut by 100 basis points between September and December. You've got income tax rates being cut across the board. And GST, not only is the system reformed with the number of slabs coming down from 5 to 3, but in addition, the effective rate, the weighted average rate, GST rate was 11.5%. It's now 9.5%. So it's a reduction of 2 percentage points. That'll provide a huge boost to consumption. On top of that, we've just had a very good monsoon. So I think this year, real GDP, this fiscal year, real GDP should grow around 9%.
Indeed.
And partly also because the base is relatively low. Last year was a modest year, 6.5% growth last year. I think compared to that, we're going to see a much stronger year. And the following year, again, I think it'll be closer to 7.5%, because the momentum of the GST cuts, it's only starting now. It'll continue through at least the first half of the next fiscal year. So if you're looking at calendar year, then that takes us to around this time next year.
Indeed.
So I think we'll get another, so if you look at calendar year basis, growth this year should be a little over 8%. Next year should be close to just below 8.
We'll move on to our next story. Gentlemen, do stay with us, and we'll come back to you for your reactions on this story as well. On October 1, 2025, China is going to be launching its new K visa. It's being seen as a bold immigration initiative aimed at attracting young professionals in science, technology, engineering, and maths. And it's happening at a time when the US's H-1B visa rules have been tightened and there's a steep $100,000 fee hike that has been imposed on applicants. So China's K visa apparently offers more flexibility, and it's also long-term validity, and it doesn't require employer sponsorship and the like. Let's look at the story.
China's K visa launches on October 1st, 2025. It is a new immigration category visa designed by the world's second largest economy to attract young professionals in STEM fields or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It is being positioned as China's strategic answer to the US H-1B visa, especially in the light of the $100,000 fee hike for the H-1B and tightening US regulations.
The whole point of the H-1B is to drive the most smart and gifted talent to the United States, and instead we're pushing them away. It does not go unnoticed that on the same day that this was announced, China introduced a K visa, and the purpose of the K visa is to welcome foreigners into the country. And in the introduction, they specifically mentioned that the H-1B is being restricted by the United States. So the real victim is us. It's us, because we're sending our talent, our innovation abroad to our competitors.
STEM graduates and professionals in education, research, or entrepreneurship can apply independently. No employer invite is needed. The visa allows multiple entries, flexible stays, long validity, and supports academic, cultural, and business ventures. What's required are academic credentials, proof of work, or research. The H-1B program too impacted more than just tech professionals.
The level of employers that rely on the innovation of the H-1B is much broader than the tech companies. So, you're talking about hospitals, universities, rural doctors and dentists, renewable energy, oil and gas, manufacturing, engineering, the clergy, finance, infrastructure, architecture, lawyers, CPAs, transportation.
China's K-visa aims to boost innovation and global ties. Interest is surging in India and South Asia, with STEM talent eyeing China's tech ecosystem. Chinese authorities plan global outreach programs to hubs like the US, EU, and ASEAN as part of its 2035 tech superpower vision. The Economic Brief, DD India.
Well, I guess Prasenjit Basu and Dr. Rajat Kathuria are still with us. Dr. Kathuria, is the opportunity cost worth it for the United States? Or does it have talent of its own that can match the H-1B talent that they are foregoing?
No, as your gentleman said on the program, I think this is going to have negative impacts on the US economy almost immediately and then into the future as well. But I think China's move, as was said in the clip, China's move is a very good tactical move, and it might be actually good for all of us as well. If you look at it in totality, of course, at the margin, people might shift to China. The high, qualified individuals might shift to China. But, as we've said often enough about when you make comparisons about China and the United States, especially looking at it from the lens of India, so the differences not only of the language, the cultural conditions, the kind of whole lock-in of Indians that has happened in the United States has happened over a period of time. So the switching costs will be very high. And what I mean that this policy actually might be of benefit is that, United States might recognize that China is moving in. It's a tactic to attract talent, and United States might back off, or they may be easing of the policy. So it might be good for all of us that China has done this. In fact, I think the impacts of this will be seen pretty rapidly because there'll be a decline in the margin, or the additional numbers will decline in the United States. It won't affect the people who already have the visas. That clarity is already there. But the people who are going to go to the US, they are going to be impacted. And I think very few companies and very few individuals are likely to pay this hefty fee. But I think what is likely to happen is, given this new Chinese strategy or new Chinese tactic, if one to call it, United States might go to the drawing board. We've seen in the recent past that uncertainty seems to be more sort of pervasive than stability. So we see of newer announcements. So I won't be surprised if there is a certain change that is affected in this new H-1B policy. Of course, India will be affected. India will be affected massively if this actually policy becomes long-term and it continues post-Trump.
So, Mr. Basu, what should Indian young professionals be thinking about? They have global ambitions. What should they be thinking about right now? Because it's not only China that's inviting talent, it's Germany. We heard the ambassador there, he was very keen, and he said that their policy is pretty stable.
Well, I think the rest of the world wants Indian talent. Germany, Japan, the UK, Canada, Australia, they're all looking out for Indian talent. But of course, the US is by far the biggest hub, and the prohibition, a $100,000 fee is as good as banning H-1B visas for the next 12 months. That's initially it's just a 12-month thing. Almost nobody is going to pay $100,000 to hire a foreign employee. So that is, so those who are students in the United States, I feel for them. Those Indians who have taken on student loans to go to the US to study are really going to be in a bit of a mess over the next 12 months. They'll have to look at opportunities outside.
Right.
Now, I think China is not really a serious alternative. It's important to remember.
They have the money.
They have the money. They can pay decent salaries, perhaps. But the problem with China is that there are lots of examples of China arbitrarily arresting.
Okay.
So I was just seeing that Mintz, there's a due diligence firm. There were 5 employees arrested for 2 years, not heard from for 2 years. They were released after 2 years. There are lots of these similar examples. I remember Rio Tinto. The interesting thing is that they often arrest people of Chinese ethnicity more than any others.
Okay.
So the point is that foreign talent may be a little bit wary of taking up the China opportunity. But yes, the fact that China is offering this means that the US will have to think twice. And there is an anti-immigrant mood even in places like the UK, for instance.
Okay.
The Reform UK party is now leading in the polls with a strong anti-immigrant message. So this isn't just a US thing. In the Western world, there is an anti-immigrant mood, and Germany, the current administration in Germany, has just come in at the beginning of this year, in March this year, is countering the AfD and will be in power for another 4.5 years. So that's an attractive place, and there are other attractive opportunities. But the hole that is created by
the H-1B visa being lost.
In the US is very difficult to fill.
Sure, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much to Prasenjit Basu and Dr. Rajat Kathuria. Thank you very much for unbundling this for us and helping us to understand it better. Moving on to our next story, which is about Indonesia. After nearly a decade of negotiations, Indonesia and the European Union have reached a landmark trade deal that's set to reshape economic ties. The agreement promises billions in trade benefits, lower tariffs, and a major boost for sectors like electric vehicles and clean energy. Diptanshu Kashyap has more.
Indonesia and the EU sealed a major trade deal in Bali after nearly a decade of talks. The CEPA, an investment protection agreement, follow EU pacts with Singapore and Vietnam. The deal cuts tariffs, eases trade and boosts investment in EVs, pharma and electronics. Trump's tariff push sped up negotiations.
Indonesia exports are expected to increase in key commodities such as palm oil, coffee, textile and apparel, fisheries, electronics, footwear and forestry products, including furniture.
The deal cuts import duties on 98.5% of EU goods to Indonesia, with steep tariffs like 50% on EU cars phased out over 5 years. In return, 90% of Indonesian exports, palm oil, coffee, textiles and more, get zero tariffs in the EU. Brussels says EU exporters will save 600 million euros yearly in duties. Jakarta expects trade to double in 5 years. European Commission President von der Leyen says the deal boosts jobs and secures key clean technology, minerals like nickel, copper, bauxite and tin.
Indonesia is only the European Union's 5th largest ASEAN trade partner. That means there is the huge untapped potential, which was confirmed to me by the representatives and CEOs of the businesses with whom we met in the morning in the event organized by Eurochambers.
The deal needs legal review and ratification, aiming to start by January 1st, 2027. By then, 80% of Indonesia's exports to the EU will be tariff-free. As Indonesia nears upper middle income status, some trade perks will shift. Indonesia's chief economic minister called it a milestone to ease tariff risks and boost supply chains for minerals, renewables and innovation. Talks with EU automakers on EVs are underway. The EU gains better access to key minerals. Palm oil tariffs will end, but non-tariff barriers like the delayed deforestation regulation remain a challenge. Diptanshu Kashyap's report for the Economic Brief, DD India.
Well, President Donald Trump is placing tariffs at the heart of U.S. foreign policy, and that's reshaping global trade dynamics. And amid these tensions, the United Nations General Assembly is once again bringing the world together. Leaders from across the globe meeting to discuss trade, finance, climate and cooperation. Now, this year's UNGA is defined by trade disputes, economic support pledges and calls for reform, with countries making their voices heard. We leave you with Tarun's report here. Let's take a look at his report. Thanks very much for being with us. UNGA 2025's general debate began on September 23, spotlighting climate, AI, gender, mental health and sustainability. The theme, Better Together, urges global action, but rising US tariffs shift the tone. South Africa is negotiating with Washington to ease Trump-era trade levies.
We are now involved in negotiations with the United States Trade Representative to see the extent to which we can reduce that.
The 80th UNGA is more than speeches. It's a test of multilateralism. Can the UNGA rise to meet the world's challenges, or will it fall short of its mission? Economic stability is the central battleground. On the UNGA sidelines, leaders discuss trade, tariffs and financing for development.
Global power is moving. You can debate how much or how far this will go, from American hegemony to great power rivalry. And technological change is shrinking that geographic advantage that we had and expanding the fields of conflict from the virtual to the extraterrestrial. All of this is reducing, I can't have to observe this during UN week, reducing the effectiveness of our multilateral institutions from the WTO to the UN, on which middle powers like Canada have greatly relied.
The UN faces a stark choice between fragmentation or progress. This reflects the UNGA's core dilemma. Can it manage the world economy, or is it losing ground?
We cannot ignore the gap between the aspiration and the implementation as far as the UN system is concerned. Geopolitical tensions, rising nationalisms, and inequalities threaten the international cooperation that sustainable development requires.
As the UNGA 2025 unfolds, trade and climate lead the agenda, but critics say it's ignoring deeper economic issues. Tariffs, resource gaps, and weak reforms raise doubts about its ability to guide global stability. Tarun Bhattghaya's report for the Economic Brief, DD India.